Picture 38 riders walking their horses toward a city held by an army of 1,600 men. They are not there to fight that army. They are there to make it chase them. It is September of 1842 outside San Antonio, and the man at the head of that little column is a 25-year-old ranger captain named Jack Hays. Everything you are about to see, the numbers, the date, the plan, the outcome, we can document. Not from a legend told 60 years later, but from the report the commander wrote that same week. After 2 episodes spent asking whether a thing even happened, this one we get to prove. Welcome back to the Western Ledger. I'm Lamar. This is Devil Jack, the story of John Coffee Hays, and we've reached the year the record finally catches up with the legend. Enchanted Rock and Bandera Pass we told honestly, which meant admitting how much we could not prove. 1842 is the opposite problem. It is documented almost to the hour. So today, we get to show our work. If that's the history you want, the frontier told with the record kept honest, subscribe and ride with us. To understand 1842, you have to understand what 1836 did not settle. San Jacinto won Texas its independence. It did not win Texas an agreed border. Texas claimed the Rio Grande. Mexico had never accepted the loss at all, and between the two lay 100 miles of disputed ground and a grudge 6 years cold. Mexico had not forgotten Texas. It had simply been busy, and in 1842, it came back, twice. In March, a Mexican general named Rafael Vásquez crossed the border with several hundred men and rode into San Antonio. The town, with no force able to hold it, emptied out ahead of him. Vásquez raised the Mexican flag over the plaza, held the city 2 days, and then, his supplies thin and his orders limited, turned around and went home. It was less an invasion than a message. We can still reach you whenever we like. But a message lands hardest on the people who live where it strikes. Families along the San Antonio River had loaded what they could carry and run for the interior, not for the first time, and, they were learning, not for the last. To live on this frontier was to keep a wagon half-packed. Texas wanted to answer with a march on Mexico. President Sam Houston, broke and wary of a war the Republic could not pay for, held the reins hard and refused. The volunteers went home angry. And the message from the Rio Grande hung in the air all summer, waiting. It did not have to wait long. The second time, Mexico sent a professional. General Adrian Woll was a French soldier of fortune in Mexican service, disciplined, methodical, and nothing like the raider Vásquez had been. In September, he crossed the Rio Grande with a real army, something like 1,600 men, infantry and cavalry, with artillery and a company of Cherokee scouts. And Woll did the one thing no one expected. Instead of coming up the known roads, he had his men cut a path through the brush country where none existed. A hidden march through the mesquite that kept his army invisible until it was almost on top of the town. Hays was doing his job. He had scouted the main roads west of San Antonio for exactly this kind of threat, and found nothing. Because the threat was not on the roads. On the morning of September 11th, Mexican Independence Day, chosen deliberately, San Antonio woke to a cannon blast. Woll's army was already in the plaza. The district court happened to be in session. In a single stroke, Woll captured the judge, the lawyers, the jurors, the officers of the court, more than 50 prominent Texans, and would soon send them on the long march to a Mexican fortress prison called Perote, from which not all of them would return. For the second time in a year, the Mexican flag flew over San Antonio. But this time, the man who raised it meant to stay a while. And this time, Texas was not going to simply ride away. The word went out to the settlements, and in Seguin, a hard old veteran began gathering men. His name was Matthew Caldwell, Old Paint, a survivor of the disastrous Santa Fe expedition, only just released from a Mexican prison himself. Now he was free, armed, and looking for exactly this fight. From Seguin and Gonzales, Caldwell gathered volunteers. In the end, only a little over 200 men. Against Woll's 1,600, that was outnumbered better than 7-1. Caldwell knew it, so he didn't plan to attack. He planned to make the enemy attack him, on ground of his own choosing. He moved his little force to the bed of Salado Creek, a few miles east of San Antonio. The creek ran in a hollow, with timber and banks that gave a man cover and a clear field of fire across open prairie. If Caldwell could lure Woll's army out of the fortified town and onto that prairie, his 200 riflemen, shooting from cover, could bleed an army. But someone had to spring the trap. Someone had to ride up to 1,600 men and make them give chase. That was Hayes's job. And there was a problem. The Texan camp could find only 38 horses still fit to ride. So 38 men, Hayes's 14 Rangers among them, alongside names like Henry McCulloch, Bigfoot Wallace, and Ad Gillespie, set out at dawn to bait an army. Hayes rode almost to the Alamo itself, within half a mile of Woll's base, hoping to draw out perhaps 50 horsemen he could run back to the creek. Instead, he kicked over the whole nest. 200 Mexican cavalry came after him, then 40 Cherokee, then 300 more, with Woll himself riding behind them. Hayes turned and ran, exactly as planned. What followed was a running fight back to the Salado, the Rangers twisting in their saddles to fire as Mexican cavalry tried to cut them off. More than 200 shots were fired in that chase. Not one Texan fell. They reached the creek and dropped into the cover where Caldwell's men were waiting. Then the trap closed. Woll formed his army on the open prairie and threw it at the creek, musket volleys and cannon raking the timber. But the cannon, firing from distance, did little, and every time the Mexican infantry advanced into the open, Caldwell's sharpshooters cut them down from cover. It was precisely the slaughter Caldwell had designed. When it ended, the lopsidedness was almost hard to believe. Mexican dead were put at around 60, with many more wounded. The Texans had lost a single man killed and 9 wounded. And here is the thing the legend of Bandera Pass could never give us. We can date this fight to the day, the 17th of September, 1842, because the commander who was there, Matthew Caldwell, wrote it down. Some accounts drift to the 18th. We'll trust the man who held the ground and kept the report. But a victory at the Salado was not the whole of that day. 7 miles off, it was already going wrong. While Hayes was springing the trap, another company of Texans was racing to join the fight and riding into catastrophe. Captain Nicholas Dawson had raised 53 men, most from Fayette County, around LaGrange. Hearing that Caldwell was engaged and badly outnumbered, Dawson pushed hard for the Salado, determined not to let his countrymen fight alone. He never reached them. Mexican cavalry cut Dawson's company off on the open prairie short of the creek and ringed them with artillery. There was no cover and no way through. Dawson tried to surrender. What happened next is the reason this is remembered not as a battle, but as a massacre. The accounts differ on the details, as they always do, but the outline is grimly consistent. As the Texans laid down their arms, the firing went on. When it stopped, some 36 of the 53 were dead. 15 were taken prisoner and marched to Perote. Only a handful would ever come home. One of the dead was a man named Griffin, an enslaved man brought to the fight by the Maverick family. When his weapon shattered in his hands, by the accounts that survive, he did not run. He tore a limb from a mesquite tree and fought on with it until he was killed. History rarely troubled to record men like Griffin. This time it did, and so we say his name. The same afternoon, barely 7 miles apart, had produced both the cleanest victory of Texas's frontier war and one of its ugliest losses. Woll had taken San Antonio. He had not taken it to keep. That night, under cover of darkness, the Mexican army slipped out of the city and started back toward the Rio Grande. And this time, Texas did not let him ride away clean. Caldwell put his men on Woll's trail. It was a hard, wet chase. Days of pushing south through swollen creeks and mud, the Texans strung out in scattered groups, riding faster than their supply and their reinforcements could follow. That gap would matter. They caught the retreating army at the Hondo, where Woll had planted a cannon on the far bank to cover the crossing and hold the Texans back. Caldwell gave Jack Hays leave to take it. What followed was the kind of thing that built the name. Hays led his men straight at the gun, closing the distance before the crews could work it, fighting in among the wheels. By one account, a ranger named Kit Ackland leaned from his saddle and shot the gunners down between the spokes of the wheels. They took the cannon, and then they could not use it. The powder wagons were already across the river, and a captured gun with nothing to feed it is just cold iron. The support Hays expected behind him never came up in time, and a far larger Mexican force turned and drove the Rangers back off the ground they had just paid for. Hays came off that riverbank with little to show but the fact of the charge itself. The guns lost again, men down, the enemy still moving. On paper, it was a failure. It was not a clean victory like the Salado. It was something Rangers would come to know well over the next 6 years. A furious, half-supported charge that takes the objective and cannot hold it. But it told everyone watching exactly what this young captain would do when handed a hard job: ride straight at it. Woll got his army across the Hondo and kept marching. The rivers were up from a wet fall, the pursuit bogged down, and Texas, for now, let him go. But the rage did not go with him. Twice in 1 year, Mexico had walked into Texas, taken San Antonio, and ridden home. Twice. The demand for an answer became impossible to hold back, and that fall the Republic launched an expedition toward the Rio Grande under General Alexander Somerville. And the Perote prisoners were still gone. The captured court, the Dawson survivors, chained in a fortress 1,000 miles south. Texas wanted them home, and wanted Woll answered for, and those two hungers pulled the Republic toward a border it could not actually afford to cross. Hays scouted for it, but when the expedition reached the river, and Somerville, judging the venture unwise, ordered his men to turn back, Hays turned back with him. Others did not. A few hundred men pushed on across the river on their own and were captured at a town called Mir. And it is those men, not Hays's, who would face the infamous black bean lottery in a Mexican prison. That is a story for another day. What matters here is that Jack Hays was not among them. He had learned the discipline the frontier taught hardest, knowing which fight to walk away from. By the end of 1842, Hays was 25 years old, and he had done the things the legends only claimed. He had baited an army. He had sprung a trap that worked. He had charged a cannon. All of it on the record. All of it real. What he did not yet have was the weapon that would make his name immortal. That was 2 years away, at a creek in the hill country, where a handful of rangers would meet a Comanche war party with something no one on the plains had ever seen. Next episode, the pause ends and the direction reverses. In 1846, the United States and Mexico go to war, and Jack Hayes crosses the Rio Grande not as a defender, but as a colonel of Texas Rangers marching on the Mexican city of Monterrey. If you want the frontier told with the record kept honest, subscribe to the Western Ledger and turn on notifications. I'm Lamar. Thanks for being here.